Have you ever thought about how unfair the world of Harry Potter truly is? What if one of the most tragic stories in the series was hidden in plain sight, disguised as a charming subplot? In today's video, you will find out why the history of house elves is the most brutal and unjust tale in the entire magical universe. The Harry Potter books and movies are often seen as a light-hearted fantasy for children, and at first glance that makes sense. The early stories of the young wizard are filled with wonder, humor, and adventure. But beneath the spells and Quidditch matches, there's a darker reality, one filled with cruelty, oppression, and entire races doomed to suffering. One of the greatest injustices in the wizarding world is the fate of house elves. These small, peculiar creatures, draped in little more than rags, exist only to serve. Their magic is strong, yet they are forbidden from wielding wands. They live to obey, their lives dedicated to wizards who rarely show them kindness. Most fans remember Dobby, the brave and loyal elf who sacrificed himself to save Harry Potter. But his story is an exception. Most house elves live in silent servitude, bound by ancient magical contracts, never daring to dream of freedom. Where did they come from? Why are they trapped in this miserable existence? Clues scattered throughout the book suggest a tragic past. Centuries ago, something catastrophic happened to their people, something that left them desperate and vulnerable. In their time of need, wizards offered them refuge. But that kindness came with a cost. The elves, in gratitude, swore eternal servitude. What began as an act of loyalty turned into generations of enslavement. Over time, wizards grew comfortable with this power. They took the elves' magic for granted, stripping them of their rights and independence. Even worse, the elves themselves came to accept their fate. They saw freedom not as a gift, but as a punishment. A disgraced elf, one cast out by their master, felt only shame. That's the most horrifying part of their story. What could be worse than a race so deeply brainwashed that they love their own chains? Even Hogwarts, supposedly a beacon of justice, played a role in this oppression. The house elves who worked there were granted more freedom than their counterparts in noble wizarding families, but they were still forced to labor endlessly, hidden in the shadows of the castle. Yet no one seemed to care. Even kind-hearted wizards like Hagrid never questioned it. Only one person did, Hermione Granger. She was outraged when she saw a house elf, Winky, publicly humiliated by her master, Barty Crouch Sr. That moment changed everything for Hermione. She founded SPEW, an organization to fight for elf rights, and even convinced Harry and Ron to join. But no one took her seriously. Not even the elves themselves wanted to be freed. Some, however, played significant roles in the story, though they are often overlooked. Kreacher, the bitter and broken servant of the Black family, was used by Voldemort in one of his most sinister schemes. Remember the cursed locket hidden in the cave? Voldemort forced Kreacher to drink the poison guarding it. Later, the elf returned with his master, Regulus Black, who stole the locket and replaced it with a fake. That one act of defiance cost Regulus his life, but Kreacher never forgot. Then there's Winky, an elf who never made it into the films but played a heartbreaking role in the books. She was fiercely loyal to the Crouch family, tasked with guarding Barty Crouch Jr., a convicted Death Eater. When he escaped, Winky was cast out in disgrace. She was devastated. To her, freedom was the worst punishment imaginable. She fell into despair, drowning her sorrows in butterbeer, unable to find purpose without a master to serve. House elves were kind, hard-working, and incredibly powerful, yet their destiny was shaped by wizards who saw them as nothing more than tools. Even in a world where magic could make anything possible, no one ever truly fought for their freedom. And that is what makes their story the most tragic injustice in the Harry Potter universe. The tragedy of the house elves runs deeper than most wizards ever cared to notice. They were everywhere, cleaning, cooking, serving, but they were invisible to those they worked for. Generations of witches and wizards grew up seeing them as nothing more than fixtures of the magical world, like enchanted brooms or self-stirring cauldrons. Their pain was ignored, their history forgotten, their suffering dismissed as the natural order of things. Even those who claimed to fight for justice did nothing. Dumbledore, who spoke so often about love and kindness, never lifted a finger to change their fate. He knew Hogwarts ran on their labor, knew they toiled in secret under the castle, yet he never granted them real freedom. He treated them kindly, yes, but kindness is not the same as justice. He never questioned why a school filled with young witches and wizards needed a hidden workforce of unpaid magical beings. The worst part was that the elves themselves had been conditioned to accept their fate. The magic that bound them was more than just spells. It was centuries of manipulation, of words whispered into their minds until they believed them to be true. They weren't just enslaved. They were made to love their own chains. That's why Hermione's fight for their rights was met with laughter, even from her own friends. Harry and Ron saw her efforts as a silly crusade, something unnecessary, something doomed to fail. They saw the elves' unwillingness to leave as proof that things were fine the way they were. But how do you convince someone they deserve freedom when they've been raised to believe they don't? Dobby was different. He saw the truth. He knew what it meant to be trapped under the Malfoys, to be punished for the smallest mistakes, to be treated as less than nothing. He longed for freedom, even when he didn't know what it would feel like. And when he finally got it, he embraced it with everything he had. But freedom came at a cost. The moment Dobby was free, he was outcast. Other elves saw him as unnatural, as broken, as something shameful. Even in Hogwarts, where he found work and a sense of purpose, he was alone. Winky despised him for wanting freedom. The other elves shunned him, and the world he fought to be a part of never truly accepted him. And yet, he never stopped fighting. He was the only elf to stand against the system, the only one who dared to defy the world that tried to keep him in chains. He saved Harry's life more than once, took risks no one else would, and in the end, he died for a cause that was never truly his fight. His death was the ultimate proof of how little wizards valued his kind. He wasn't given a grand funeral, wasn't honored with statues or remembered in history books. His sacrifice was personal, private, marked only by the grave Harry dug with his own hands. But Dobby's story, as tragic as it was, wasn't the only one worth telling. House elves existed in the shadows of every wizarding family, each with their own silent struggles, their own moments of pain that no one ever bothered to ask about. Take Kreacher. He had lived for years in a house filled with hate, serving a family that looked down on him even as they used him. He had no love for the world beyond the Black household, because the world had never given him a reason to. He clung to his loyalty, not because he was blind, but because it was all he had left. When his master Regulus died, Kreacher was the only one who knew the truth. He watched as the family he had been bound to crumbled, as the house fell into ruin, as the last person who had ever shown him kindness was erased from history. No one asked him about Regulus. No one cared what had happened in that cave. No one knew how many years he had spent mourning alone in the dark. And then there was Winky. Stripped of her purpose, abandoned by the family she had been sworn to serve, she spiraled into despair. She didn't know how to exist without someone to obey, without orders to follow. She wasn't just sad, she was broken. She drank, not because she wanted to, but because she couldn't bear to live with what she had become. A free elf was a lost elf, a creature with no identity, no home, no meaning. She had been trained to believe that servitude was love, that obedience was honor, that to be without a master was to be without a soul. And the world moved on. Wizards went about their lives. The battle for Hogwarts was won, Voldemort was defeated, and house elves remained exactly where they had always been. There was no great revolution, no moment of awakening. SPEW faded into obscurity, a noble but ultimately meaningless attempt to change a system too deeply ingrained to be undone by one girl's determination. Perhaps that is the real tragedy of the house elves, not just that they were enslaved, but that even after the war, even after all the sacrifices, nothing truly changed for them. Dobby was free, but he died. Creature was given kindness in his final years, but he was still bound to serve. Winky was left to drink herself into oblivion, a reminder that freedom meant nothing without a reason to live. The wizards never saw the true horror of it. They saw house elves as magical creatures, not people. They thought of their servitude as a quirk of their nature, something written into their very being, something that had always been and always would be. But what if that wasn't true? What if, before their enslavement, house elves had their own world, their own culture, their own lives free from wizarding control? What if the magic that bound them wasn't natural at all, but something imposed upon them so long ago that no one even remembered? What if their love for servitude wasn't an instinct, but a curse? No one will ever know. Their past has been erased, their voices silenced, their stories lost. Wizards may believe themselves to be heroes, but they built their world on the backs of creatures who never had a choice. And that is why the story of house elves is the cruelest and most unjust tale in the entire wizarding world.